Please stop idealizing sex work. This sub has a huge issue with idealizing sex work to the point of ridiculousness. Let me explain some things to you. Sex work is not an easy industry. It is exploitative and violent. The vast majority of sex workers want to leave the industry. Most started when they were underage. Most come from low socioeconomic status backgrounds. A significant number are human trafficking victims. Exact statistics about this can be found through organizations like Nordic Model Now and Trafficking Hub. Sex work is more dehumanizing than other kinds of labor. I was used as a child to create childhood sexual abuse material. Additionally, for my job, I interact with human trafficking victims and refugees fleeing the sex trade, being brutally raped daily, threatened, beaten, spat upon, etc. is much worse than working a minimum wage job. I've done both. There is no comparison. Yes, there are some sex workers who aren't trafficked. But even for them, the job isn't a cakewalk. If you're anti-work, you understand that capitalism is a system of coercion that forces people to tolerate the intolerable and negates the idea of free choice. This does not stop being true because the work in question is sex work. If you believe that McDonald's workers aren't freely choosing to work at McDonald's, you cannot possibly believe that a sex worker freely chooses to do sex work. But people talk as if capitalism negates consent in every industry except the sex industry. Writing posts about how easy sex work is compared to other jobs is incredibly tone-deaf. Sex work isn't just showing up and having orgasms. Even if sex workers aren't trafficked, the job is still hard and dangerous. If you are anti-work and sex work is work, then you should be anti-sex work. This sub has a huge issue with idealizing sex work. I'm a regular reader and haven't observed any idealization of sex work. Can you give an example of what you're referring to? I feel like this post was made in response to a specific post and I'm unsure which one. I don't think I've seen anyone say anything about sex work here. LMSO. Answer. Anti-work is about ending exploitation in the work-worker relationship whenever and as much as possible. As has been pointed out to you repeatedly, nobody here is cheering on any abusive or coercive practices. Anti-work is very much against that. I'm sorry you suffered in your past. Anti-work wants to see sex workers and all related workers get legal protections and full benefits under the laws, same as any other worker, which would help prevent your tragedy from playing out for anyone else. Join the work, and you can help make the suffering you endured be amongst the last of its kind. Sounds like an industry in need of worker protections and regulations and unions. In other words, comrades, I am a sex worker, and I work separately with human trafficking victims. They are not the same thing. Children who are exploited, like yourself, are not sex workers. You are a victim. I am so sorry that you suffered this kind of abuse. It was not work. It was abuse. I agree that there should be more discussion about human trafficking and how some of the folks we see as sex workers are, in fact, actually victims. We cannot, however, demonize legitimate sex work or everyone who patronized sex workers. Sex work is consensual. Human trafficking is abuse. They are not the same. You being a CSA victim does not make you a sex worker. I was used to make CSAM. I have also since been a sex worker. These two are not the same. And as for your friend that worked consensually but also dealt with self-harm and suicidal ideation, two things. 1. The two may not be related. Depression is a real thing that really sucks to deal with. And 2. If they are related, it's very likely in large part due to the shame and stigma associated with consensual sex work. Shame and stigma you're perpetuating by conflating the sex trade as a whole with consensual sex work. This is ridiculous. I'm not gonna further marginalize people who are sex workers. Unionize sex workers. Most of what you're describing sounds like sex slavery, not sex work. I am a sex worker and I definitely don't idealize my work, especially on this sub. But I have a lot of issues with what you're saying. A significant number are trafficking victims. The exact statistics you're talking about are from religious anti-porn campaigns. Did you know that more illegal material, child exploitation, is shared on Facebook than Pornhub? If the issue was really preventing trafficking, these campaigns would be targeted towards Instagram, Facebook, and other sites that are frequently found hosting that type of material. Myself and other sex workers are focused on enthusiastic consent and safety. The vast majority of sex workers want to leave the industry. As a sex worker, I don't know a single sex worker who wants to leave the industry. If they want to leave, they leave. Of course, there are many people who do survival sex work, meaning it's their only option. But that doesn't make up the vast majority of us. And many SW like myself spend time volunteering with survival sex workers. I volunteer a few times a month for a shelter that works with street-based sex workers in Vancouver's notorious DTES. Sex work is more dehumanizing than other kinds of labor. I'm not sure where you got that idea. I was far more dehumanized by working for $8 an hour at Tim Hortons than I've ever been in sex work. I am able to choose my clients, choose my work hours, and work around my personal needs. I understand that every sex worker comes from a different situation and background, but how are Amazon warehouse workers not more exploited? Sure, if all work is bad, that means sex work is bad. Would we all rather never work? Probably. But if someone else is happy with the job they do, why is it anyone else's business? I do agree that it's not the easy money that many make it out to be, neither are most jobs. However, I love my job. My work makes me very happy. All of the strippers, camgirls, escorts, and porn stars I know are far happier than they were when they were working minimum wage or in an office. Believe it or not, a person can enjoy their work and life and still be anti-work or anti-capitalist. Just because I like what I do doesn't mean I don't think we exist in a broken and corrupt system. Edit for punctuation. Just to be clear, sex work and sexual slavery are not nearly the same. Just like how me working on an Alaskan fishing boat and a Cambodian slave working on a Myanmar fishing boat are not the same. I can support a woman starting an OnlyFans or stripping while abhorring trafficking children. Human trafficking equals sex work. Not only was I trafficked, but I also did a little stripping in my 20s and have friends who are sex workers. I have also worked with children who were trafficked. It is separate, but in America, it is almost impossible to differentiate. We need to take sex trafficking seriously, but allow for people to make an honest living. The only way to do that would be to legalize it, have workers register, and then focus on the unregistered. However, simply arresting the unregistered would continue trafficking. It would be necessary to offer support to unregistered workers, investigate and arrest the traffickers, and supply job training and relocation. Sex work is dangerous because it can't be regulated. Decriminalize it and you'll see that it does not have to be unsafe. There are child slaves producing chocolate for Nestle in the third world who are being abused for their labor. This is a separate concept to fair trade chocolate workers in a cooperatively owned cocoa farm, growing and selling cocoa. You are arguing against sex work by saying it has very high propensities for violence and abuse. Why is that? Because it is not considered work by society and therefore rarely given labor rights or protections. The fact it is not considered work is literally the reason why it is so dangerous. So your logic is actually logic for why sex work should be considered work. Under a world of zero labor laws, employers are free to essentially kidnap vulnerable people, force them to work against their will in horrendous and unsafe conditions, and take as much of their money as they like. In customer-facing roles such as sex work, it is also in the employer's interest to allow the customer to abuse the worker. This is what happens in places today with no enforceable labor laws. And it's exactly what happens with sex work in the developed world because people see it as somehow different to any other work. It is not different. If you have a job, you should be entitled to labor laws and protections. Just because a book written a long time ago told you to forgive prostitutes but the guys running the cult decided to twist the meaning so they could gain more influence leading the cult. So you think this book tells you that prostitution is somehow a dirty act that revokes all of your human rights. Doesn't mean that your cult actually gives anyone the power to revoke human rights or labor protections. Sex work, including prostitution, is no more shameful or abusive in and of itself than any other work. People who are unable to get past their own personal hang-ups about sex prevent it from becoming a regulated, protected industry like every other field is. For no lawful reason, sex work is work. There is no other argument. Op as another CSA victim. This is not the W you think it is, and we get nothing disencouraging independent sex work. If anything, normalization of sex work and taxing and regulating would improve the lives of the people you're soapboxing for here. Furthermore, when was the last time a sex work opinion was here? I'm here all the time and have encountered zero of the points you're talking about. Before I say anything up, I want to recognize that your experience sounds truly awful and cruel. You were trafficked. I'm so sorry. You were robbed of your innocence, and if that forever colors your view of sex work, I completely understand that. No one should ever feel forced to do something like that. I want to point out, however, that I feel a sense of gratitude that sex work was an option for me. I became an escort from 20,172,021. I used it to leave a financially and emotionally abusive relationship. It was one of the few professions that gave me enough money to afford a 2-bedroom apartment on my own with no degree. I did certain things to keep myself safe. For instance, I had a first date with anyone I would meet that had zero expectation of anything physical so that I can see how they would behave. I never let them come to my place. I always used condoms. And I always refused when something felt off. That didn't completely keep me away from unsavory people, but I did feel safe for most of my encounters. I agree that sex work can be exploitative, but make no mistake, I enjoyed what I did. I love sex and I love pleasing people. It is a short career field as it can get emotionally exhausting. But if you like to be sexual and you want to get paid for it, you should feel zero shame in that. Sex work is work. All work is inherently coerced under capitalism. People shouldn't try to make any kind of work better or worse due to what manner of work it is. It is still coerced due to capitalism. Please don't equate sex work to human trafficking, child sex workers, and sex trafficking. Of course, these are all issues highly relevant when discussing sex work in the sex industry. Yes, it's an industry, but a lot of these problems exist because it is unregulated or any regulation is not in favor of the sex worker. This is the case with many criminal and stigmatized things. Higher rates of alcoholism during Prohibition, in regulated textile industries, etc. I'm Thai. I have friends and family who are sex workers. I've worked with sex workers before in bars. They are trying to make a living like so many of us. Some of them are the breadwinners of their families. Do they want another job? Probably. Your post just tells people should stop idealizing sex work, but you have provided no examples. If anything, this post is not informative and biased against sex workers, which only puts sex workers in a worse light. Shame on you. Myself. Exploited to make CP. Unless there are some rather significant details you aren't sharing about your present life. Being a CSA victim doesn't make you a sex worker? Like, at all? You're equating two vastly different things. I'm a former dom in the USA who also posed for nude pictures and did amateur porn. I would go back to it in a heartbeat, but my physical and mental health has declined too much. Most of my friends who also do sex work, stripping, porn, escort, prostitute, etc., wouldn't trade it for other types of work. It pays too well. You set your own hours. You choose your own clients, etc. There is always a risk of violence, but if you're doing it correctly, it's no more risky than picking someone up at a bar or club. Sex work is not trafficking. Full stop. It is an industry that needs legal protections the same as any other. Trafficking is a separate issue that needs separate considerations. Legalizing or decriminalizing sex work would enable more resources to go to victims rather than cops harassing and arresting consenting workers trying to make a living. Victims of trafficking who are able to would also be able to come forward without fear of being arrested and penalized because of their forced activities.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Haircast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.